So hello, everyone. Welcome to our dialogue with the author. Welcome to you from wherever you are in the world. We've got people coming in from Belgium and Sweden and Albuquerque. We've got people coming in from Canada and the US, and I don't see where everybody else is coming. If you're joined the call, please go ahead and put your name in the chat, where you're coming in from, where you're calling in from, and one thing that drew you to this call. It would be great to just know who's here and who's joining today. My name is Dawn Dole, and I am the Executive Director for the Taos Institute. The Taos Institute hosts these dialogue with the authors. We try to do one around once a month, and it's usually a book that is fairly new. Sometimes it could be an older book that we just want to feature, but we're excited when a new book comes out and we get to share it, and the authors get to come in and talk about the book. So the Taos Institute is a nonprofit educational organization, and we have workshops and conferences. We have dialogue with the author, we publish books, we have seminars, and just lots of different ways that you can engage with others to learn about social construction and how social construction can inform our practices. So we bring lots of different disciplines together, people in organizational work or education, healthcare, community work, therapy, and counseling. And the idea is to share across all the disciplines, what are the practices, the relational practices, the collaborative practices, the dialogic and the appreciative, and how do we create, so it's that social construction, how do we create the world we want to live in and make it a better place? So that's what we're all about, and I want to welcome you again. So today we have Sonja, Foss, and Karen Foss, who have written a book, Feminism in Practice. And it's a practical handbook that you can use to experiment with various strategies for creating change in your life and the world, even if you have little or no interest in feminism. If you're curious about the state of contemporary feminism, the book and the dialogue will introduce you to contemporary feminists and current feminist ideas and strategies. So in the practice of social construction, we see a range of options for change that represent different degrees of commitment toward a social construction stance in the world. And so Karen and Sonja are going to be talking to us today about their book, what they're excited about, and how the ideas can really work and inform your life and practice. So I'm going to turn it over to Karen and Sonja to introduce themselves, and I'm going to put them on spotlight so they're here so everyone can see them. And in the meantime, if everybody can keep themselves on mute, that would be helpful. And we're going to be using the chat for questions throughout our time together this morning, this afternoon, this evening, wherever you are in the world. So rely on the chat. So welcome. I'm going to turn over to Karen.
Okay, thank you. And good morning, everyone. Thank you, Dawn, for that introduction and for hosting. We're delighted to be here. I'm Karen Foss from the University of New Mexico, and I'm joined by my twin sister, Sonja Foss, from the University of Colorado, Denver. As you know, we're the co-authors, along with Alena Ruggerio from Southern Oregon University, of Feminism in Practice, Strategies for Making Change, which was published this past fall by Waveland Press. And although it was written as a textbook to be used in classes about feminist movement, feminist rhetoric, gender, advocacy, and change, it also can be a kind of handbook, as Dawn said, for activists looking to expand the strategies in their toolkits. And we should say up front that this book is not a social constructionist text per se, but it is highly informed by social construction. We also know that many of you are interested in change and in making change happen. And we also hope there's a big feminist contingent out there among you. So we think there's something here for everyone. So you should all have a copy of the introduction to part 1, as well as the handout for chapter 1. And you should also have a list of references that we'll be mentioning today in case you want to pursue them further. And as Dawn said, there will be time for questions at the end. So as we're speaking, please put your questions in the chat, and Dawn will keep track of those. So before we turn to an overview of the book itself, we'd like to begin with a bit of background of what led us to write this book and how we came to study alternative change strategies and how all of this connects to feminism and social construction. So we did plan to study and teach communication. We were going to be high school French and Spanish teachers, and we got almost all the way through our bachelor's degrees, but we decided we didn't want to spend our lives looking at confused faces, which is really what you do, I think, when you teach a foreign language. So we switched to communication, and we went on to get our graduate degrees in that field. We've since figured out that what we were really interested in when we were studying languages is how symbols work. And we were intrigued by the different realities that get created just by changing symbols. And that's what we love about communication. We get to figure out, to practice, and to experiment with the processes by which communication constructs reality. And we were delighted to get to do it in English instead of in some foreign language. We were also delighted when in graduate school, we read Berger and Luckman's The Social Construction of Reality for the first time. So we finally had a philosophical framework for how we've been thinking about communication. Now, this is also the point at which feminism comes in. We became feminists in the mid-1970s. Well, we were probably always feminists, but we didn't have a label for it until then. But we discovered that women and feminism were nowhere to be found in the communication discipline. I remember once in a graduate class, I raised my hand and asked if I could write a paper about a woman speaker, because back then, communication scholars only studied men's communication, and specifically the communication of what we like to call great white dead men, men that are often deemed important enough to have their communication preserved. So we helped introduce women into the discipline by studying both women's communication and feminism as a social movement. Now, although this was a big change in terms of the discipline, at another level, it wasn't much of a change at all, because what we were doing was really just the process of add women and stir. Women were being incorporated into the study of communication, but the frameworks and theories for studying them remained the same. They'd been developed from studying the communication of men. But because women often communicate quite differently from men, it became clear that the theories and the frameworks and the concepts needed to be revised and expanded to truly take women's communication into account. So Sonja and I, along with many other feminist scholars, began to reconceptualize standard theories and concepts about communication by asking, what if we developed this theory or this concept from the standpoint of women's communication, from feminist perspectives? What would that look like? As an example, Sonja and I took the traditional model of public speaking that was derived from Aristotle in the 5th century BC, a model that was developed from the speaking practices of elite Greek men, and we revisioned it to include the speaking practices of women and other marginalized groups. And the outcome was our book, Inviting Transformation, in which we offer an extended list of strategies that take into account these different ways to do public speaking. Another example is our book, Gender Stories, where we conceptualize gender not in the binary terms that our society encourages, male and female as kind of polarized opposites, but as a story that each individual constructs and performs. Well, then it occurred to us that there were probably feminist activists out there whose work we could also use to continue with reconceptualizing communication. So we went looking for theories about rhetoric from feminists like Bell Hooks and Gloria Anzaldúa, Paula Gunn Allen, Sonja Johnson, and Sally Miller-Gerhardt. And we wrote a book summarizing their theories called Feminist Rhetorical Theories. And by the way, when we use the term rhetoric, it's just an older word for communication, but essentially means the same thing. Well, we discovered that while many of these feminists had been traditional activists who relied on persuasion to accomplish change, many actually ended up with very different, more invitational approaches to change, many of which were grounded in symbols. Gloria Anzaldúa, for example, articulated the notion of shifting metaphors as a strategy. And Sally Gerhardt had the idea of enfoldment as an alternative to persuasion. And Sonja Johnson's decision to stop resisting and instead to just start living in the world she desired was for her the most important way to get the change that she wanted to see. Well, so as a result of writing that book, it occurred to us that there seemed to be two very different paradigms of change operating. And we called these the paradigm of constricted potentiality and the paradigm of constructed potentiality. We don't want to go into a lot of detail here, but in the paradigm of constricted potentiality, rhetors focus their efforts on the material features of the world. In other words, they focus on those components that already exist and that are available to them. Things like people, systems, organizations, events, documents, laws, traditions, and artifacts. And because the components available for generating change are those that are already present in tangible form, they are fixed and limited and capable of being depleted. So that's why we labeled this paradigm the paradigm of constricted potentiality, because the potential for change is constricted by the limited nature of the resources available. So change agents operating in this paradigm use persuasion as the primary strategy for generating change. They try to influence people who can accomplish the changes they desire by influence or affecting material resources in some way. Now, in contrast, in the paradigm of constructed potentiality, change agents focus on symbolic resources as the elements available for use in the change process. So this is really the social construction paradigm. Because of the nature of symbolicity, change agents in this paradigm really have unlimited resources to work with because they never run out of new ways to configure and construct symbols. It's always possible to generate new words, new concepts, and new options. And the potential for change in this paradigm is invented or constructed then because it is continually being created from symbolic resources. Now, the rhetorical strategy that characterizes this paradigm is interpretation, the process of assigning meaning to the data around us in the world. With interpretation, you can always make another choice about what to attend to, what to perceive, and how to interpret that perception. And in contrast to the other paradigm, interpretation is directed internally. So change agents in this paradigm use interpretation to alter their own mental and emotional states, which of course can then lead to a variety of external changes as well. So all of these elements contributed to the book that is our focus here today. We were encouraged to write this book by our author, Alena, who had been teaching from our Feminist Rhetorical Theories book for many years. And her students kept wanting to know what change strategies contemporary feminists are using. And so with Alena's help, we set out to find out, and Feminism in Practice is the result. So let's take a look at the book. If you've taken a look at the first chapter, you know that we talk about the difficulty of defining feminism, about the fact that there are lots of different definitions of feminism, and we give you about 20 of those definitions. We also address how feminism has been and continues to be such a contested term. So no matter how successful feminism has been, how transformative it's been for so many lives, the negative constructions around feminism persist. It is still the F word. So we follow this in the next chapter with a description of the 4 feminist waves and the triggering events, the happening places, and the key ideas of those waves. So these first 2 chapters then really show the many iterations of feminist movement and how they are different ways of constructing, interpreting, labeling, and acting in the world. They're essentially different feminist communities with different meanings for what patriarchy is, for what gender is, and for how change happens. Now, the heart of the book itself deals with 20 contemporary feminists, their definitions of feminism, and their change strategies. And you'll see all of these women listed on your handout. We've organized them around change objectives that we think capture the nature and function of contemporary feminist change efforts. So these objectives are proclaiming identity, naming a problem, enriching a system, changing a system, and creating an alternative system. And as you can see, they move from a focus on material conditions and proclaiming identity. So what I look like is a determining factor of who I am, how I construct and relate to the world around me, to more symbolic instructions with the final objective, which is creating an alternative world. So feminists who want to create an entirely new system aren't tied so much to material conditions. They understand that systems are made up and they can make another one up by changing how they think and talk. So in addition to these objectives, we also identified 3 assumptions that help explain or ground each objective. And these assumptions are not necessarily obvious, and change agents may not be able to articulate them, but it seemed important for us to try to understand the beliefs that undergird each of the change objectives. And then finally, we identified 3 specific strategies that each feminist uses to try to achieve the objective that she's working toward. So we have objectives, we have assumptions that undergird those objectives, and then we have particular change strategies designed to realize each objective. So now what we like to do is to talk you through those 5 objectives and a couple of their assumptions, and then show you how they play out in the strategies of some of the feminists. So Sonja is going to start off by talking about our first change objective, proclaiming identity. Sonja?
Good morning, everyone. I'm happy to be talking about our first objective, which is proclaiming identity. And it's grounded in the assertion that the personal is political. So when asserting identity is an organizing frame for change, then identity markers like gender, race, class, age, religion, and ability are highlighted in a belief that these factors can't be separated out in a person's lived experiences, and that the most profound and potentially most radical politics come directly out of identity. So in other words, the intersectionality of identity categories influences both how individuals see the world and how others respond to them. And because certain identity attributes have social capital and others function as social deficits, the interlocking of identity characteristics necessarily has social consequences in the world. Now, one assumption that grounds the objective of proclaiming identity is that marginalized individuals find ways to reclaim, value, and celebrate their identities, despite the negative stereotypes that are being offered up by the dominant culture. So in the face of these negative stereotypes, marginalized groups have 2 choices. One, they can adopt a negative self-image in a kind of internalized oppression, or they can do as feminist theorist Bell Hooks suggests and talk back. Talking back involves defying the norms of the dominant culture, refusing to stay contained within the labels provided by that culture, and it's the first step in the process of what Bell Hooks calls decolonization. Another assumption about self-definition that undergirds the objective of proclaiming identity is that the process of proclaiming identity can result in both self-change and societal change. So in the process of establishing, defining, and affirming their selfhood, these individuals shift from object to subject, from being objectified by others to becoming the subject of their own lives. So these experiences of self-definition or self-transformation can then cause substantial changes to the larger systems of which they are a part. For contemporary feminists who focus on proclaiming identity and their change efforts are Padma Lakshmi, host of the TV show Top Chef, Kat Black, who is a transgender vlogger, Vilissa Thompson, a disability activist, and the musician Lizzo. And they engage in various strategies designed to proclaim their identities as a way to make change. So one strategy we see them using is disrupting norms. And Lizzo, for example, breaks a number of norms around appropriate femininity, including society's unrealistic and narrow standards of feminine beauty. So Lizzo knows that her body doesn't conform to conventional beauty norms because she is fat. But instead of covering her body up with clothing or starving herself to meet conventional beauty standards, she embraces her body as its own ideal. Now, Lizzo also disrupts norms around sexual expression for fat women, who are typically dismissed as sexual beings. And Lizzo does this by engaging in the same kind of actions that women who conform to conventional presentations of sexuality might do, such as wearing see-through apparel, twerking, and thrusting her butt and her breasts into the viewer's face in her videos. As another example, Padma Lakshmi uses a strategy of reinterpreting identity markers to accomplish the objective of proclaiming identity. Lakshmi has transformed aspects of her identity that she initially saw as limiting into positive and empowering features. Having absorbed Western ideals of beauty, Lakshmi's brown skin was a major source of dissatisfaction for her. As she put it, she wished she could be a more saleable color, a better commodity, a toothpaste commercial worthy girl. But ultimately, her dark features were responsible for her first major acting job, and she came to value her skin color as part of what gave her a distinctive appearance. But she says, it took years for the internalized self-loathing to fade. So now it's Karen's turn again, and she's going to take you through the second change objective, naming a problem.
So change agents who choose to focus on naming a problem are interested in defining what needs to be addressed, resolved, or changed in order to achieve a different kind of future. And language is at the heart of any act of naming and offers an infinite number of ways to talk about something. A speaker can always choose another word or another phrase. But language doesn't serve all speakers equally, so individuals who choose naming a problem as a change objective understand that issues of naming are necessarily political. So the first assumption for those who focus on naming a problem can't be addressed unless it is named. And this task is made more difficult if words are not available in a language to adequately describe that problem. So something can just feel off, vaguely wrong, uncomfortable, but it can't be talked about because there are no words to describe that phenomenon. And then people start to doubt the veracity of that experience. Or you have to talk around something or tell it slant, to use Emily Dickinson's term, because the language is inadequate for expressing your thoughts. And I think the concept of sexual harassment is a good example of this. The phrase wasn't invented until 1972, when a woman teaching a class on women and work at Cornell realized that all of her students had either been fired or left a job because of unwanted sexual attention from bosses, but they didn't have a way to talk about it until the term was invented. So at the core of naming a problem then is having to negotiate a language that doesn't provide all of its speakers with the tools they need to actually account for their experiences. Now, a second assumption is that language used to name something determines how it is perceived. This is not news to any of us. The choice of terms to describe a problem influences how that individual perceives and experiences the world. So what seem to be observations about reality are constrained by the choice of terms used to conceptualize and describe that reality. Now, the four feminists that we've included in the book who make use of naming a problem as their primary objective are Nadia Okamoto, an activist who works to address the stigma around menstruation, Jamie Margolin, a climate activist, comedian Margaret Cho, and public intellectual and cultural critic Camille Paglia. Now, Nadia Okamoto names as the problem the taboo around talking about menstruation. She seeks to destigmatize it. This is her primary strategy, by sharing her own stories around the taboo. She opens her book, Period Power, by telling about getting her first period. While she grew up in a family that talked openly about body parts and periods, she still thought she was dying when her first period arrived. She thought she was bleeding from the inside out. And Okamoto also shares another example of when she actually took advantage of the stigma around periods. In middle school, Okamoto and her friends would get out of gym class every day by telling their older male teacher that they were menstruating. She said, he never questioned that we were on our periods 24/7, all of us at the same time, all the time. So Okamoto encourages her audiences to think about experiences they might have had with periods as a step toward destigmatizing the period taboo. Now, another feminist in this category is Camille Paglia, who names as the problem feminism itself. Paglia describes most contemporary feminists as bunglers, whiners, and bullying sanctimonious sermonizers. She claims that feminism has become a catch-all vegetable drawer where bunches of clingy sob sisters can store their moldy neuroses. She applauds the freedoms and risks now available to women and insists that women assume the responsibilities that accompany these freedoms. So she says the woman who is aware and attuned to the risks of the modern world would not leave her purse out on the street unattended or sleep with her doors wide open at night. These actions would be foolish. Similarly, as Paglia puts it, a girl who lets herself get dead drunk at a fraternity party is a fool. A girl who goes upstairs alone with a brother at a fraternity party is an idiot. As she continues, feminists call this blaming the victim. I call it common sense. And with that, I'll turn it back to Sonja, who will discuss our next objective of enriching a system.
Those who want to enrich the system start from the premise that a system as it exists is largely functional and basically fair. Although it's not perfect, those who work toward this change objective see the system as generally working well and doing what it's supposed to. So enriching the system, bringing women and minorities and different perspectives and values more fully into it, is considered a logical and useful objective. One of the assumptions behind the objective of enriching a system is that all voices in a system deserve to be heard. The need to give voice to those who have not had full access to a system is central to the task of enriching a system. And the end goal, of course, is a more equitable, diverse, and inclusive system and society. Change agents who focus on enriching a system seek to make those who've been left out of the system full partners whose views and perspectives and feelings are taken into account. Another assumption is that a system flourishes when it values and incorporates diverse perspectives. Organizations and systems are healthy and survive when they are diverse and differentiated, capable of many responses. They become brittle and unadaptable when they are uniform and specialized. So systems and organizations that value diversity are able to produce more insightful and effective responses to the problems and obstacles that they encounter. For feminists who fit into the category of working to enrich a system are Shonda Rhimes, creator, writer, and executive producer of television dramas, New Zealand Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern, Portuguese visual artist Joana Vasconcelos, and Pakistani education activist Malala Yousafzai. So one strategy used by these contemporary feminists to enrich a system is normalizing diversity. And this is one of Shonda Rhimes' primary change strategies. She prefers to call what she's doing ordinary instead of diversity, because as she puts it, women, people of color, LGBTQ people equal way more than 50% of the population. So she fills her world of television with people of all hues, genders, backgrounds, and sexual orientations, which she says is perfectly normal in the 21st century. So part of her process of normalizing means that she's colorblind when creating and casting characters for her shows. She doesn't write the race of characters into a script, but instead waits to see who shows up for the auditions. Cultivating ambiguity is another strategy for enriching a system. And this one is used by Joana Vasconcelos, a Portuguese visual artist. And her works encourage viewers to consider multiple possible meanings for them, so prompting viewers to question dogmatic positions and thus allow for new kinds of spaces and ways of seeing. One way in which she cultivates ambiguity is through her large sculptures, in which she transforms small everyday objects into new items. So in her sculpture titled Marilyn, for example, she made this huge high-heeled shoe sculpture out of cooking pots and lids. So while the pots and the lids are likely to evoke connotations related to domesticity, women's relegation to the home, drudgery, and also creativity and care. Because the pots and lids are made into this sparkly high-heeled shoe, and the piece is called Marilyn, then additional possible connotations are evoked. Marilyn Monroe and the challenges she faced, the discomfort associated with much of women's clothing, and also the glamour and sexiness of some women's clothing. So the resultant message is very ambiguous, which then allows new meanings and new perspectives to surface. So Karen's going to now take over again to talk about the objective of changing a system.
Okay, so those who seek to change a system see that system as so dysfunctional and so defective that minor adjustments are inadequate for addressing its deficiencies. So rather than attending to superficial symptoms of a problem, for example, they hope to alter expectations, attitudes, policies, rules, and laws, efforts that they believe have the capacity to be genuinely transformative. So one assumption that's operating with the goal of changing a system is that resistance may function to preserve and strengthen a system rather than to dismantle it. Now, when trying to change a system, a typical response is to hammer away at what is wrong with that system, to fight, to attack, to oppose it until it changes. But many activists are beginning to realize that railing against something, criticizing, opposing, protesting, focuses attention on what is not wanted rather than on what is. And consequently, the efforts designed to achieve change can backfire, perpetuating rather than changing the system. Now, this isn't to say that these kinds of protests, they can remind protesters of their capabilities, their strength, they can bring like-minded collaborators together, but all of these benefits may not negate the fact that resistance may actually reinforce rather than change a system. Now, a second assumption that we found that accompanies working for change within a system concerns the risk of co-optation by that system. On the surface, the assimilation of the goals and interests of an outsider group into an established system seems positive. It suggests that the organization's vision aligns with and is committed to the same goals as the social movement. But in fact, these goals are often robbed of their radical edge and their transformative potential when they become part of the larger system. In addition, after internalizing a system's rules, values, and norms for most of their working lives, change agents who reach the top ranks in an organization often are unable to change it because the system affects the way they think, feel, and act. As organizational scholar Kathy Ferguson puts it, it is hard to be a closet radical when an inspection of the closets is part of the organization's daily routine. So we've identified 4 feminists who work to change a system to make it more equitable, just, and inclusive. Carrie Goldberg is one. She's an attorney specializing in sexual privacy, violation, revenge porn, cyberstalking, sextortion, and sexual assault. Nadia Bolz-Weber is a second one. She's a pastor, a writer, a speaker, public theologian, and most important, a spiritual disruptor. We also have tennis champion Serena Williams and poet Amanda Gorman. Now, learning a system is one strategy that's important to changing a system, and this is a strategy that Carrie Goldberg uses. To be able to pursue every possible course of action for her clients, Goldberg believes in the importance of learning whatever system she is targeting. She advises, study the organization or structure that gives your nemesis power. Figure out how the systems work and what it takes to dismantle them. If your enemies have the law on their side, find legal loopholes and charge through them. Be creative and relentless. So by thoroughly researching the systems involved in a case, Goldberg can devise the most appropriate and effective solutions for her clients. Another strategy we uncovered for changing a system is making the boundaries of the existing system visible. And this is a strategy used by tennis player Serena Williams. And she does this primarily by pointing out stereotypes so they can be considered, discussed, and addressed. And one way she does this is by pushing against the traditional image of tennis and who should be playing the game. So her tennis outfits, many of which she designs herself, are one example of this strategy. She has played in what she calls biker tennis chic, as well as in a snakeskin print dress and form-fitting catsuits, usually in black, but sometimes in pink. And when she's required to wear white at Wimbledon, a leftover from the Victorian era when tennis was invented, and everyone had to wear white because sweat stains didn't show up as much, Williams often plays in tennis dresses with see-through panels and cutouts, for example. So she follows the rules, but she points out the absurdity of the rules. In fact, she once described herself as too black for my tennis whites. And now it's Sonja's turn again, and she'll talk you through our last change objective, creating an alternative system.
So some feminists believe that systems themselves are the problem. And so they see the only option as creating an entirely new or an alternative system. Feminist theorist Sonja Johnson's description of her alienation from the dominant patriarchal system suggests how utterly foreign a system can seem to members of marginalized groups. Here's what she says. I look out upon the world men have made, their legislatures, courts, churches, schools, art, architecture, their politics, their economics, and I don't see anything I would have done as they have done it. Not one single thing. Their system does not reflect me at all, neither my mode of being in the world, nor my worldview. Rather, it is inimical to all I love, all I desire, all I am. It is not my home. One assumption that's operating when considering the need for creating an entirely new system is that there are limitless possibilities available for inventing that new system. Systems are constructions, and systems are always under construction. So change agents always have the option of inventing something new. As feminist theorist Gloria Anzaldúa suggests, the life you thought inevitable, unalterable, and fixed in some foundational reality is smoke, a mental construction, fabrication. So if it's all made up, you can compose it anew and you can compose it differently. Another assumption behind this change objective is that acting in ways consistent with the desired new system can bring that system into being. Often overlooked in efforts to create a new system is the possibility of enacting the desired new world, actually living now in the present moment as if it were already in place. So Sonja Johnson's Live in the World the way you want the world to be, and Gandhi's Be the change you want to see in the world, both reference this strategy of enactment. And with enactment, individuals behave as if the system they want is already realized. So according to this assumption, the way to get to a future world in which women are not afraid, for example, is for women to be unafraid now. The four women we identified who seek to create an alternative world are feminist scholar Sarah Ahmed, architect Leslie Keynes Wiseman, Jennifer Armbruster, who's an artist and a consultant who works to develop feminist businesses, and US Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. Leslie Keynes Wiseman brings the strategy of fantasizing to the toolkit of strategies designed to create an alternative world. She's an architect who wants to transform the practice of architecture in order to create more livable and sustainable environments. And her strategy of fantasizing offers a way to break free from our preconceptions about space and buildings. We often see fantasizing as an escape from reality, but Wiseman sees it as a way of dealing with reality. It's a form of problem solving, not an escape from it. So when women are asked to fantasize about and conceptualize their ideal living environments, their visions do differ dramatically from existing conceptions of buildings and cities. One woman in a class Wiseman taught fantasized about a great goddess percolation system that enables women to perk to anywhere in the country in 7 minutes or less. And to top it off, she envisioned cake, ice cream, and coffee being served on the goddess platform as the women wait for the percolation process to begin. So for Wiseman, projecting images by means of fantasy is a way to begin to experience and create a woman-identified environment. Jennifer Armbruster, who consults about feminist business practices, offers the strategy of learning through improvising in order to bring a different world into being. She doesn't believe that the current system of capitalism can be repaired or remedied because she says it's a system built on toxic masculine values. She believes, however, that a new feminine economy can emerge when feminists improvise and experiment. So her strategy of learning through improvising does just that. Excuse me. She considers everything an experiment, which involves asking lots of questions, giving oneself the freedom to make mistakes, making space for ideas to arrive, and also taking risks. So that's our quick journey through the objectives, assumptions, and strategies that we uncovered from the 20 feminists we included in the book. Thanks so much for listening to our brief summary, and now we'd love to hear your thoughts and answer any questions you might have. So do you have any questions that have come into the chat, Don?
There's no questions in the chat yet. I just wonder if everybody can just take a minute and maybe have a little couple seconds of quiet and just think about how this book and the ideas in it and how Karen and Sonja have shared what's coming up for you, what questions might be emerging, what examples or stories of your own might be emerging, how some of these ideas might affect your work, your life. So we have somebody say, Louise McCullough says, this is amazing, exactly what I need right now, and working to advance the system with mothers in addiction recovery. Can't wait to read the book.
It sounds like a really interesting application.
Yeah.
Yeah, and a very important one.
Yeah.
Arlie Harp, I hope I said your name right. She's French-American performance activist. I've worked for 10 years on identity and asking people about feminism as a way to limit or empower lives and how to transform our cultures. Thank you for this presentation. Having a map of what exists is very useful. I'm wondering, what is your takeaway from the map? So that's a question for you. What's your takeaway from this map you've created?
I think for me, one of the things that came out of the book was, I mean, we've done a lot, as Karen said, we've done a lot with feminism and change strategies, but until we got ourselves really up to date with what contemporary feminists, many of them in pop culture, are doing, I think I didn't fully appreciate how much feminism has infused our culture and how creative feminists are still being in their own different arenas. So I guess I came to appreciate the wide variety of feminists, their commitment, their creative strategies. So I guess it made me even more proud that I'm a feminist.
And I'd like to add to that yes, there was a lot of appreciation going on as we were writing the book, but there were also some moments of disappointment or discouragement, perhaps, because many of the feminists at first did not want to use the term feminist to describe themselves. They had to kind of come around to the term. And so it was discouraging to see how much of that is still going on in the world. So there was this kind of new love for the diversity of feminism, but also this discouragement that so many people still don't understand it.
question. Have you been able to determine if one of these methods is more effective than another?
No, well, we did not set out to write in the book and to try to figure that out. I think our ending conclusion is they all work. They should be in, all of them should be in everybody's toolkit. You use them in different situations. You use them with different audiences. Some of them we happen to like more than others because we're social constructionists. We're drawn to the last one more than some of the others, for example. But I wouldn't discount any of them. And I think in their own way, they're all very useful. They're tackling problems from different perspectives. And I think that's always a good thing to do.
Here's one. How do you feel about revolutionary approach versus rather reformatory approach, especially in terms of communication, which is most current today? And does that differ from region to region?
Do you want to take it, Karen?
Well, I mean, I think it goes back to what you just said, Sonja, that both reformist and radical approaches are necessary. They need to be used at different times with different audiences and different contexts. I think at some points in our own lives, we've been more reformist and other times we've been more radical. And I think that's pretty typical of how we maybe move through life situations, and certain ones appeal at different moments, but they're all useful.
But I guess I would also say, though, that if we had to put ourselves in one category or the other, we'd put ourselves in the revolutionary category. I mean, when we transform communication theories and frameworks, we're being more radical. We're not being very reformist.
Right.
So I think we are drawn more to that edge of things.
Yeah.
So if I had to put us in one category,
Right.
I would put us there. And I don't know about the regional variations. Could the questioner talk more about that or explain more what you meant?
I don't know if it'll pop up. Let's maybe, I mean, we can come back to that. I'll look at the bottom of the chat, and that was Leon Van Actor. And then, so we have a question here from Marlene. Where would critical race theory fit into the typology? Where in the 5 categories does Kimberly Crenshaw fit?
I think she's the foundation for much of proclaiming identity because of the focus on taking all aspects of identity into account and realizing how important that is in the process of making change.
But I think it's certainly infused, though, really in all of the categories. I mean, naming the problem, oppression can certainly be the problem around race, creating a new system, the systems we've been using to deal with interactions among racial groups in this country are clearly not working. So I think depending on the particular activist and what her focus is, you're going to see that in all of the objectives.
And here's a systems question also. Do you think systems need voices too, even though they may be constructions? It is something I wonder about, and maybe the reaction of the system to what we do are the voice of the system, and how can we hear it with empathy and understanding?
Oh, that's a very interesting question. I haven't thought about that, so I'll just start and see where we end up. I think, I forget who it was that said that systems and organizations are really just the individuals who make them up. So when a system is talking or being given voice or articulating something, it's coming from somewhere. It's not this abstract thing that nobody knows how it got constructed. There are people behind it. Now, of all those people, whose perspective is being articulated as the perspective of the system certainly becomes important. I don't think I ended up anywhere profound. Well, that's a very interesting thing to think about. Whoever asked that question, I'd love to know more about that.
You want another question, or do we want people to come off mute? And well, here's another question. How can you can see how women still can't own their power as indicated by using the word feminism. How might we work with the media to stop disempowering women?
Well, I guess I would say using a lot of the strategy is in the book would help. We can talk about how our identities don't get represented very well. We can name the problem and use the various strategies that do that. Yeah, I guess I would say use the whole toolbox to try to get things to change there. And they certainly have been. I mean, when we think about what things were like in the 70s, when you never, for example, heard a female voice on the radio, we have made changes. So it is possible.
And I'd like to add that I think it's also important for women to think about and process their own inability to stand up for themselves and to admit that they're awesome. As Shonda Rhimes describes, she went to an awards ceremony once where she and many other women in the entertainment industry were getting awards. And she said every time someone's name was announced, they would look away, they would laugh in a funny way, they would try to dismiss the value of the award. We should be proclaiming our power. That you added something, Sonja?
Oh, no, you just keep freezing up.
Oh, sorry. Okay.
Yeah.
But so she said she's finally learned to just say thank you and stop right there instead of dismissing whatever credit she is being given. So I think women have to work on that as well, individually, personally.
Here's just a comment. I love the reflective question part at the end of the chapter. I was surprised at where my favorite feminist positions are, and it was more clear what are my engagements. Thanks for sharing it with us.
Oh, glad it was useful.
Yeah, and here's another one. Guide us, please, in healing and recovering from being silenced. So it's back to what you were just talking about. Even after decades of self-work, I notice I felt terror when asked to speak. You two are not silenced. Here you two are articulate and joyful, fully expressed, brava, revolutionaries. You are guiding us. I wish there were vitamins and nourishment to engender courage. So we've got about 5 minutes left. Let's just, I'm gonna take you off speaker view, and I'm going to just invite anyone else to come in and make a comment, a thought. Let's have everyone's voice be heard.
Should I start by addressing that last comment? Thank you for the compliment, but you should know that Karen and I in high school, junior high, were shy, self-conscious. If we had to speak in front of a class or something, we would turn bright red, our hands would shake. This was not a good picture. But because we wanted to be teachers, we knew we had to get over that. And so the way to get over it is to keep doing it, even when it feels awful, even when you don't want to do it, even when you don't do it very well at first, keep doing it. That's what led us to be the way we are today. So whoever gave that comment, you can do it.
Thank you.
And if you want to take your video off or turn your video on, we can at least see you. If you don't, that's okay too. But just to invite everyone to have their face here with us, and anybody want to come off mute and say anything?
It's fun to see all who is here.
Yes.
Well,
Yeah. Oh,
And we see two
no.
friends here too.
Hi.
Fran and Marla.
Hi. So I was thinking about your comment about yourselves and the leaning more, Sonja, I think you said toward the revolutionary. And it's so time bound because I'm thinking now of us trailblazers in our academic discipline and when we started making trouble, and this was extremely revolutionary. I mean, it was just rocking the bottom of everything. But then you get folded into the structure and you kind of cycles back through. So now you're not revolutionary exactly. And then you might actually become a fossil at some point because you were a revolutionary and now things have changed in other ways. And I'm just interested in your personal reflections about that for yourselves, because you have been at disrupting, I'll use that term, disrupting the system in lots of different ways for a number of years now, and it seems to me that one moves in and out of where you are. No, Marlene's going to say
I just
something.
wanted to add something because as you respond, I wanted to remind Karen of a session that we did, I think at Western a number of years ago, where they were celebrating the 25th anniversary of a significant issue of women's studies and communication, where we had sort of laid out the framework of a new way of thinking about communication or new ways. And Karen and I and another older academic were attacked by young academics who were on the panel for not having done enough, that we weren't revolutionary enough in our time. And so, to speak to Fern's point about change.
Well, and I have to add that Sonja and I have chuckled recently because now at conventions, we seem to be the people that we used to see, who were 10 or 20 years older than us. They'd speak up at some panel and say something that seemed so out of it and whatever. And then everyone ignored them and went back to whatever they were doing. And we think, oh yeah, that's what we're appearing like to most of these young people, because we do get irritated with some current themes, but there's not much we can do about that,
Right. Well, I want to address Fern's initial question, and I think that's an excellent point for like Karen talked about, raising her hand and asking, could you write a paper on a woman? That was radical back then.
Yes.
But that now seems a really, really tiny step. But now I think in our discipline, I suspect in some others, feminism has sort of become institutionalized.
Yeah.
And now there's almost a formula that you have to use in writing feminist analyses.
Mm-hmm.
And it's become as hegemonic as the dominant hegemony.
Yeah. Yes.
And so Karen and I just did a little presentation about this at our last convention, and man, were people railing at us. But it's become hegemonic. And it's really discouraging, because what was fun and useful about feminism always was coming up with new things, being surprised by what you found, not going and knowing what you're going to find.
Yeah.
So I want to bring us to a close here. We are out of time. I know somebody just raised their hand. The Taos Institute is having we're daring to have a face-to-face conference next November. And the focus of the conference is going to be on taking practices like this and creating the future. So my question as I leave here would be, if Karen and Sonja were to come and do a session at the conference, the question would be, where is feminism going in the next 10 years? What would it look like? How would it impact lives? How would it change society? So really future forming, future thinking kinds of questions and topics. So I invite all of you to keep that in mind as you continue this amazing work. All of you in the different fields and disciplines that you're in, different communities and regions around the world. Where is feminism going? And what would it look like in the next 10 years in your work, in your life, in your place in the world? So thank you so much to Karen and Sonja and to all of you for participating today.
Yes, thank you, everyone. It was very fun.
Yeah, thanks for everybody who joined.